Dueling speeches in Ohio. It's shaping up again as the electoral prize, but economic conditions are better than you might think.
Federal spending has risen at the lowest pace in nearly 60 years.
And we fact-check campaign rhetoric.
He bailed out the public sector.
I'm Michael Shear for the New York Times. I'm joined now live by Jeff Zeleny in Washington. So Jeff, we have quite a split-screen moment in Ohio today, don't we?
We certainly do. I mean, President Obama is going to be giving what his campaign is billing as a major economic address this afternoon. Shortly after that, Governor Mitt Romney is going to be across the state in Ohio. He'll be in Cincinnati, sort of giving a bit of his own response. You can ask, why Ohio? Well, Ohio has more than just 18 electoral votes, which both sides would like to have, but Ohio also is a predictable bellwether. In the last 12 presidential elections, it has voted for the winner all 12 times. So that's why both candidates are focusing in Ohio on their economic message today.
But it's interesting, right, Jeff? I mean, the Ohio economy is, if anything, going in the opposite direction of what the national economy seems to be doing. It's lower, the unemployment rate is lower than the country's overall, and it seems to be kind of getting better, not worse. Does that change how they deal with their message?
I mean, the economy is on the upswing in Ohio, like it is in a lot of other battleground states across the country. It's one sort of interesting message dynamic about this campaign. And a lot of these battleground states, like Ohio, have Republican governors. Governor John Kasich of Ohio, a Republican, has been spending the last year and a half reminding voters that he is improving the economy. Well, President Obama wants to step into a bit of the same frame here and say that the economy is getting better under his watch. So the challenge for Mitt Romney as he campaigns in Ohio and in other battleground states with Republican governors is that he has to say that the economy would have gotten much better with a Republican in the White House. So it's a bit of a mixed message, but the economy in Ohio has improved significantly, largely because of the new jobs coming from in the eastern part of the state because of the oil sector, or the energy sector rather. There's a lot of new jobs coming from that, and also because of the auto bailout in Michigan. A lot of those supply chains come from Ohio. So there is some good news, which makes the argument for Governor Romney a little bit more complicated. Both guys are going to be pouring money into the state too, right? Not just their time, which of course is valuable too, but over the course of the next 4 or 5 months, we're going to see a lot of money pouring in. Is that right? No question. I mean, Columbus, Ohio is really ground zero, or one of the ground zeros for the television commercials, the ad war that's already underway, not just because of, between Mitt Romney and President Obama, but also with all the super PACs. And the Romney campaign received a bit of a boost just this week from Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate in Nevada, who said that he's going to give $10 million more to the pro-Romney super PAC. So a lot of that money is going to end up in commercials, both on television and radio in Ohio and other states. So it is the ad war there that once again will be the focus of the next 4 months of this campaign. And of course, it's amazing that we talk about a $10 million contribution as a bit of a boost, right? I mean, the kind of money that's pouring in is going to make places like Ohio, which are the focus of so much attention in the other battleground states, is going to make for just absolutely flooded airwaves with all these commercials. Flooded airwaves, and also it's one of the reasons that the president's reelection campaign and Democrats are starting to get significantly worried about being outspent overall on the air. The pro-Romney super PACs have had a much better time raising money from wealthy donors like Sheldon Adelson. So right now, Democrats are trying to find their wealthy contributors of their own to try and keep pace with these ads. But it's clear that Republicans are going to have more money on the air, at least through super PACs. It's one of the reasons that the president is going to lay out in his economic message in Cleveland, just sort of the differences between philosophies and governing approaches, who's going to be more fair to you, and that is one of the messages that he wants to be a takeaway today. And of course, just before we go, I mean, both of these guys being in the state also sort of whips up their supporters for the ground game too, right? I mean, you look at Wisconsin; it was such a loss for the president and his party. They have to make sure that there's a good ground game in the state as well as the air war. No question about that. In the Obama campaign, it's one of the reasons that they started more than a year ago. The campaign workers began arriving in offices across Ohio a year ago in April. They now have some 20 offices open across the state. The Romney campaign is trying to play catch up a little bit on this, but the ground game is equally important in Ohio. But more people will see ads in Ohio as well, more than almost any other state.
And we'll be watching. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Up next, presidential candidates have a long tradition of using statistics to exaggerate their records while misrepresenting their opponents. This year is no exception, and Peter Baker takes a closer look.
I, Ronald Reagan.
George Herbert Walker Bush.
William Jefferson Clinton.
George Walker Bush.
Barack Hussein Obama.
Candidates for president, of course, have told selective versions of the truth for many years, but of course with the advent of the internet and other research tools, it's possible now to apply more scrutiny to their statements than ever before. We took a look at the speeches by President Obama and Governor Romney and tried to compare them to independent sources of information, statistics, government figures, and so forth, to examine where they're telling the truth and where they're telling us part of the story. Nowhere is that more critical than in the issue of the economy, which is central to this campaign.
And over 4 million jobs were created in the last 2 years, more than 1 million of those in the last 6 months alone.
We've had 40 straight months with unemployment over 8%. 40 straight months. And as you recall from the beginning of the Obama's administration, they indicated that unemployment would be kept below 8% for this entire period. And they predicted that by now we'd be in the sixes with our level of unemployment.
How can you hear two such different ideas about the economy today from these candidates? It all depends on where you start counting. Governor Romney starts counting from when President Obama took office in January 2009 in the teeth of a deep recession, even though obviously his policies would take months to have any impact. President Obama prefers to start counting in March 2010, after all the job losses were over and when the picture started to turn around, essentially taking credit for all the recovery and none of the blame for anything that preceded it. Spending is another critical question in this election. It goes to the heart of how people feel about what this president has done in terms of the role of government in society.
Since I've been president, federal spending has risen at the lowest pace in nearly 60 years.
President Obama, in making his claim, is counting essentially from the beginning of October 2009, the first full fiscal year when he was president, not counting much of the spending that came in his first 8 months in office, also taking credit for spending cuts that have yet to actually take place in the next fiscal year.
He bailed out the public sector, gave billions of your dollars to companies of his friends, and added almost as much debt to this country as all the prior presidents combined.
Governor Romney, in claiming that President Obama has spent more than any president in recent memory, is counting everything that could be attributed to him. What's interesting, of course, is both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama claim a certain distance from Washington, not creatures of the nation's capital, they tell audiences. And yet both of them seem to have mastered a very old Washington art, that of the selective storytelling.
I'm now joined by Michael Cooper, who worked with Peter on this project, which will be published soon. So, you know, presidential candidates telling tall tales, we've covered them together before. Why did you guys do this project?
Well, as Governor Romney and President Obama crisscross the country trying to make their case to the voters, they're marshaling a flurry of statistics and arguments to try to explain why they think they'd be better to shepherd the economy in the next 4 years. Right. And at times they're telling stories that are fundamentally opposed to each other. And so Peter and I tried to dissect them and unpack them a little bit to see how could they be telling such night and day stories here.
And some of them are real doozies, right? I mean, the one I liked the best was this idea that I guess Mitt Romney says that we're practically not a free economy anymore.
Right. I mean, several times Governor Romney has made this case that we're only inches away from ceasing to be a free economy. And, you know, I know that people have mixed feelings on the bank bailouts and the auto bailout and different things, but I think most people would agree that we're a lot more than inches away from being like North Korea. And so if you look at data, you know, PolitiFact rated this, you know, ridiculously false. They cited the Conservative Heritage Foundation, which actually rates economies, and found the United States, you know, the 10th freest economy out of 179. So it just seemed like an example of sort of egregious hyperbole.
But it is hard to sort of say, yes, this person is lying, no, this candidate is telling the truth. I mean, they make it tough, especially in cases where they're not really quite that egregious, but they still are misleading, right?
Sure.
I mean,
there are plenty of cases that are much closer calls, and you heard Peter talking about the arguments on, is President Obama a job creator or a job destroyer? And in those cases, it depends on definitions and when you start counting. Similarly, with the spending issue, how do you count that first year when President Obama took office? How much of that spending was George W. Bush responsible for? All of these things can shade it. So we tried to unpack that a little bit so that voters could make up their own minds.
One of the things I think is really interesting is whether or not, when we all do these checks, the Post, as you mentioned, has their checks, and other places we do this big story. Do the candidates care? Do they pay attention? Does it make them any less inclined to tell a doozy the next time?
If the past is prologue, I would say mostly no. I mean, every once in a while,
they just don't care.
They don't care too much. Sometimes they'll shade their wording a little bit to try to stay a little more closer to the goalposts. But in general, I think they can do this with impunity.
And you and I were talking before, there is this question of, I guess, and maybe even some research as to whether or not the, simply, giving them another forum for these statements actually maybe helps spread the misstatement.
Right. I mean, as this sort of fact-checking industrial complex has taken root in recent years, political scientists have begun to look at it to see how it is. And there was a political scientist at Dartmouth, Brendan Nyan, who did some research that suggested that sometimes fact-checking actually confused voters more than it helped them, because it repeated the false charge even as it sought to debunk it, and it helped it take root a little bit.
I'm sure that won't be the case with your story. However, we have 4.5, 5 months left of the campaign. If you look forward, what do you expect? I mean, do you think we're just going to hear the same misstatements or exaggerations repeated? Are there going to be new ones? I mean, do they pull back and try to get a little bit better?
I mean, I expect you'll hear some of the same ones again and again because they've been repeated time after time for the last few months. I'm sure there'll be new ones coming. In my experience, the only time that they really try to pull back is if one of the candidates develops a reputation for being untrustworthy, and that in itself becomes an issue, then sometimes they have to be a little bit more careful about how they spin things.
But both of them are accusing the other of being untrustworthy, so until
there's a tipping point.
Yeah, right. Maybe somebody gets caught in something that they really can't explain away. Maybe that changes things.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
We talked about President Obama visiting Ohio earlier. Tonight he's coming here to New York City. One of his stops will be a $40,000 a plate fundraiser at the home of Sarah Jessica Parker. Jeremy Peters has more.
Okay, the guy who ended the war in Iraq, the guy who says you should be able to marry anyone you want, and the guy who created 4 million new jobs, that guy, President Obama, and Michelle are coming to my house for dinner on June 14th.
I don't know if I'm quite dressed for it, but tonight I'll be headed down to the West Village to wait outside the home of Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick, who are co-hosting a fundraiser for the president with Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue.
Hi, I'm Anna Wintour, and I'm so lucky in my work that I'm able to meet some of the most incredible women in the world.
It's part of an evening of fundraising activity for the president, who's also headed uptown to the Plaza Hotel later on for another fundraiser and a performance by Mariah Carey. It's going to be quite an A-list event, a who's who of the New York fashion world. Kenneth Cole, Mickey Drexler of J. Crew, Michael Kors. Now, the president's been taking a lot of heat from Republicans who say that associating with so many celebrities paints him as out of touch. But then again, it was Mitt Romney who just had a fundraiser a couple weeks ago in Las Vegas with none other than Donald Trump.
So please join us, but just don't be late.
That's all for today. Stay with us online for more on Campaign 2012. I'm Michael Shear. Thanks for watching.